The former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is back with us. You can get his book on Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere, Hannity.com. How are you?
I'm having a terrific time and watching...
By the way, the president said to me I was talking to him one day, and he goes, Newt Gingrich wrote a book about me. I said, yeah, I know. It's number one on the New York Times list. He goes, I know. Isn't that great? That's what he said. He goes, did you read it? I said, yeah, I read it a long time ago when it was in the early copy, in the galley copy stage.
Yeah, I'm delighted that he was aware of the book. And, of course, Eric, his son, wrote the introduction, which came out really well. And I think that for people who really want to have a better understanding of how the president operates and what, has his methods and his approaches, I think actually understanding Trump is a pretty useful kind of book. And I'm honored to have had a chance to do it and talk to you about it. And, of course, having it get to be the number one book was a big thrill. And it's done, continues to do very, very well. So it's still in the top 10 of the New York Times, and which I'm sure must be a little bit confusing for the New York Times.
No, I think you are number 5, and this is the 6th week in a row that your book has been in the top 5 on the New York Times list. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. Well, I think these are important books because they're such important times. Explain to this audience, if you can, how 11 months and there's no evidence of collusion, and the email, the fact that Don Jr. was willing to hear op research. He was willing to hear it. And it turns out we're learning a lot more about this woman and how she got a waiver and how it was Obama that let her into the country and the Obama Justice Department that gave her the waiver to get into the country. And her ties to Democrats seem to be at a pretty high level. But how is it when you have real collusion, real meetings, DNC operatives at the Ukrainian embassy, you have real information passed on, false information disseminated, information given to the DNC and Hillary's campaign? There's very few people beyond talk radio listeners and Fox watchers know this.
Well, I think it's astonishing, for example, in the case of the Ukrainian story, that you can have a Democratic National Committee person go all the way to Ukraine seeking the information, having a series of meetings with the government, going to the embassy here in Washington, and somehow none of that counts as collusion. It makes you wonder what psychologically, how do people at the New York Times and the Washington Post deal with themselves when they're that blatantly dishonest? And there's no other way to describe it. It's just literally that dishonest.
Well, and listen, if all the talk about collusion, do you think this is an unusual set of circumstances in this sense? If a friend of yours and you're running a campaign happens to mention that they may have information, they don't give you any indication what the information is that would be helpful to your campaign, do you take the meeting or not take the meeting if you think they're from a foreign country? Does it matter?
Well,
legally it doesn't.
Not only legally does it not matter, but if you look at this whole incident after 9 months, as you point out, of setting up committees, setting up a special counsel, having the New York Times and the Washington Post day after day after day put this stuff on page 1. We're supposed to be told this came down to one meeting, one time, for 20 minutes, in which the primary conversation was apparently about repealing a law on adoption that affected some powerful Russians. That's the sum to me. What does that have to do with collusion? That's the most they've come up with, and as you've pointed out, by contrast, you have absolute evidence of collusion between the Democratic National Committee and Ukraine. You have clear evidence of relationships between Bill Clinton, who got $500,000 in Moscow, John Podesta's brother, who's a registered agent for a Russian bank, the whole deal where the Clinton Foundation got millions while Secretary of State Clinton was presiding over giving 20% of our uranium rights to the Russians. You look at this stuff and you wonder, how do these people live with themselves when they are this one-sided and this dishonest?
I want to play from you part of an interview that the president did yesterday with Pat Robertson, and this is a point I've been making, and you and I have had a little back and forth about the lack of urgency that Paul Ryan and Senator Mitch McConnell have. And, my argument, Mr. Speaker, is if the Republicans want to get reelected in 2018, they better have at least 200 miles of that wall built so people can see it's getting done. They better have health care repealed in some way, at least repealed and maybe hopefully replaced. They better move towards energy independence to create the jobs that they need, because and the president, by the way, to his credit, is doing everything he can do unilaterally. And they better get his economic plan through, or I would argue Republicans risk the House and Senate. And not the Senate in as much as they should be gaining 6 seats in 2018. But listen to what the president said.
Number one, repeal and replace. I am sitting in the Oval Office with a pen in hand waiting for our senators to give it to me. For years, they've been talking about repeal, replace, repeal, replace. I think they passed it 61 times, repeal and replace. But that didn't mean anything, because you had the minority, the Republicans. They didn't have the majority, so it wasn't going to get to the president. But if it ever did, Obama wasn't going to sign it, so it didn't mean. Now we have a president that's waiting to sign it. I have pen in hand. So now it means something. You know, those other times, those many, many times that they passed it.
What's the holdup?
You have very good people. These are very good people. We have 52 senators. It's very hard to get, we need almost all of them.
Yeah.
You need almost all of them. And that's the holdup. And states are somewhat different. But with all of that being said, it has to get passed. They have to do it. They have to get together and get it done.
What will happen if they don't?
Well, I don't even want to talk about it, because I think it would be very bad. I will be very angry about it, and a lot of people will be very upset. But I'm sitting waiting for that bill to come to my desk. I hope that they do it. They've been promising it for years. They've been promising it ever since Obamacare, which has failed. It's a failed experiment. It is totally gone. It's out of business. And we have to get this done, repeal and replace.
Mitch McConnell is a tactician of great skill. You think he can pull it off? It's his job.
He's got to pull it off.
Yeah.
Mitch has to pull it off. He's working very hard. He's got to pull it off.
To me, he's got to pull it off. I know they've extended, or they're not going as early on their August vacation. They just got back from their July 4th vacation. Don't you agree with me that it's imperative they get this done?
Yeah, and I think Mitch is doing everything he can to get it done. I think that he just sent a signal when he postponed the August recess for 2 weeks, and basically on two things. He's basically to the Republican side saying, look, we're going to stay here and keep talking and keep working till we get something that'll pass. And saying to the Democratic side, we're not going to allow you to continue to block all of President Trump's appointees. We're going to insist that you let them go through, just as they approved 79 Obama appointees in 1 week. And Schumer and his team have been deliberately stopping and obstructing the president. And so I do think there's going to be pressure on that front, too. And I think that McConnell's sending a signal of just how really deeply determined he is.
Well, I think, again, the things that I say, we better see a couple of 100 miles of the wall. Healthcare better be finished, considering they've been promising since 2010, or at least a good start. Energy independence for the economy, and the president's economic plan. Lower corporate rates, repatriated money, middle-class tax cuts. I think every one of those components are important to get the American people out of poverty and off of food stamps and back in the labor force. Newt Gingrich is...
I agree with you entirely. I think they need a clear list like the one you've put together. They need to focus on it. They need to realize if they do their jobs, next year can be a pretty good year. If they don't do their jobs, next year is going to be a disaster. And Republicans need to get their heads clear that the country is watching. The country has really high expectations, and that the pressure is on Capitol Hill much more than it's on the White House.
Agreed. And they're the ones that'll pay the biggest price if they don't get the job done. And all right, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and we'll come back. We'll continue with him on the other side, his brand new book, Understanding Trump. All right, as we continue, former Speaker of the House, author of now, 6 weeks in running, a New York Times bestseller. It's called Understanding Trump. Newt Gingrich with us. What about all the issues involving all crimes we know were committed? But the only thing the media and only thing Congress seems to want to focus and fixate on is Russia, Trump, Russia.
First of all, the media, I think, is in a permanent frenzy because Hillary Clinton was supposed to win, and at 8 o'clock of the night of the election, they were all celebrating, and by 11 o'clock they were all in a state of shock Well, the reaction on the hard left has been like crazy. The term Western civilization to them means racism, or it means, the alt-right, or it means, you go down this list of things, and I'm taking them apart in my newsletter, but if you think about it, that tells you what part of the problem is. They get up in the morning, and they know that Donald Trump has done something terrible, they just aren't sure what it is. And so they print anything that they can find that makes them feel better. And you've seen this.
It's also Republicans, too. It's also never Trumpers, too, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. And you saw some of that in the confused reaction to the Warsaw speech and to his performance at the G20. I mean, there's no question Trump is a genuinely transformational figure who shakes up both parties' elites. He terrifies the left. He irritates and infuriates the anti-Trump right. But I want to go back again because you did such a great job the other night. As I told you, Callista and I both just sat and watched the entire interview with Don Jr. Because I want our audience to really understand how really sick this is. There is nothing in that meeting that's worthy of page 1 of the New York Times. There is nothing in the emails he sent. Remember, they voluntarily surfaced that there was a meeting. They hadn't included it originally because it was so irrelevant, so unimportant that they didn't remember it. They didn't think it mattered. Now they've gone back. They've revealed everything, and guess what? It didn't matter. I mean, what worries me is that Bob Mueller and his entire package of left-wing lawyers are going to find somebody for some reason who did something which they can be charged with, because that's the nature of those kind of independent counsels. And I found it very interesting that he announced promptly the other night that he was certainly going to look at the Don Jr. meeting, but I don't think he's ever announced that he's going to look at the DNC staff that went to Ukraine. He's never announced he's going to look at any of the things with the Clinton Foundation. So if you want to talk about collusion with foreign people, with foreigners, and collusion with foreign governments, I think you have to include looking at the Clinton team, looking at what the Democrats were doing in 16. In addition, I want to praise Senator Feinstein, senior Democrat from California, because she has insisted that the Judiciary Committee look into this whole question of whether Attorney General Loretta Lynch was in fact doing things that were inappropriate.
I've got to run. I think that you have hit on something that is going to eventually boomerang back to where it should be. That's my prediction. Anyway, congratulations again. 6 weeks, top 5 on the New York Times list. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And his book is called Understanding Trump. And Hannity.com, Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere. Thank you, sir.